There are a lot of countries in deep, serious trouble financially, and it all goes back to the same thing, and that's having a currency that has no value. Okay, if you don't know what value is and all you know is price, you can't run an economy. Holy cow, I never dreamed of $3,500 gold. But what should be obvious is that wasn't the top. The top is in front of us. What's happening, gold is not increasing in value. The dollar is decreasing in value, and the solution is simple. Get rid of the dollar, get rid of the pound, get rid of the lira, the marks, all of the currencies, go to gold.
This is Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Little by Little. I am thrilled to have with me Bob Moriarty. Now, Bob and I just met, although, Bob, I've been following you for a very long time, and doing a little research, I understand that you are an aviation legend. I also hear that you actually flew through the arches of the Eiffel Tower. Bob, what the hell were you thinking? And welcome to the show.
Really?
Yeah,
Did I do that?
I don't know. That's what I understand, but I would have liked to have seen that. That sounds like, I guess, aviation legend would be with an exclamation point. I understand that you have all sorts of accolades. Tell me a little bit about your aviation history.
I was born in 1946, and I graduated from high school in 1964. And at that time, young men in the U.S. faced the draft. So I didn't have the money to go to college, and I thought I'll join the Marine Corps and get it over with. And the Gulf of Tonkin incident had happened a month before. So I go through boot camp in San Diego, and they came through and said anybody that can pass a 2-year college equivalency and has 20/20 vision and good health that would like to be an officer, you could apply for flight training. And I thought about it, and I thought, let's see, as a private, I make $75 a month. And if I'm a second lieutenant with flight pay, I'd make $405 a month. So I wonder which one I should choose. So
and
I got into
1963?
No, 1964.
1964.
Yeah,
I don't mean to interrupt you because I want to hear this story, but I just have to tell you as an aside, for people who don't quite understand that, my father was married in 1964 to my mother. He graduated college that year and was this close to following the same path that you did. But he told me the first job he had in 1964 paid $5,500 a year, and he and my mother could live very comfortably off of that. So for people who don't quite understand that, how much that really was, it was an awful lot of money back then, correct?
Well, you could buy a house for $11,000. Okay, so twice your salary. A automobile was $1,000 or $1,500. Gasoline was 29 cents a gallon. A quart of milk was 30 cents. A loaf of bread was 30 cents. And how things have changed. So to continue, I started flight training when I was 18. I got my wings when I was 20. I got into fighters, flying the F-4. And then in 1968, I went to Vietnam, and I flew 800 some missions in Vietnam, both as an F-4 pilot and as a observation pilot in the Bird Dog. And of course, the only access that we had to information back then was the mainstream media, newspapers, radio, television, and we believed all the bullshit. And you look back on Vietnam now and you realize, it was nonsense. It should have been recognized as nonsense at the time. But we didn't have access to the information that people have today. So I got out of the service in 1970. I went to college. I went to work in computers as the Air Force F4. But so that's my story.
Well, that's fascinating, and thank you for your service. Tell me just real quick about flying under the arches of the Eiffel Tower. How'd that happen?
When I got out of college, I went to work in computers for Ross Perot, and I did that for 2 or 3 years, but it was really boring. I mean, you can work in computers for a year and never see that you had accomplished very much. So I was bored silly, and I used the remainder of my GI Bill to get a flight instructor's permit. And I was flying out of this airport in Danbury, Connecticut, and it kept flying through the aircraft with fuel tanks in them. And the United States exported about 90% of the small planes in the world. And there was a tiny group of pilots. Hang on a sec. Hey, Rock, be nice. Shut up. Come on. And then, so I delivered 240 small planes all over the world: Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Sweden, Finland, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, South Africa, Egypt, Sudan. I delivered airplanes just about everywhere. And while I was doing that, I set about 15 world records in different events. And I was in an air race from Paris to New York to Paris in 1981. And the president of the French Aero Club wanted me to fly with him in another race from Paris to Libreville in 1984. So we had engine problems. We had to go back to Paris. We were out of the race. And he was really disappointed because his main competition in France was going to win the race and get all the publicity. So we went out to dinner. I had a French girlfriend, and every male should have a French girlfriend at least once in his lifetime.
I'm mention that to my wife when we're done.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It's not something that you talk to the wives about. But so I had a French girlfriend. We went out to dinner on a sidewalk cafe. I had my girlfriend. He had his girlfriend. And he said, we need to do something. We should set records from Paris to Stockholm, Paris to Copenhagen, Paris to London, Paris to Naples. I said, yeah, we can do that. It's no problem. It's easy. It just costs $1,000 every time you apply for a record. Nah, we don't want to do that. I got a better idea. Why don't we fly through the Eiffel Tower? And I said, nah, we don't want to do that. It's already been done. He said, no, everybody thinks it's been done, but actually during World War II, there were cables across it to make sure that didn't happen. I said, really? And he said, tell you what we'll do. You do the flying because you're much better pilot than I am, and I'll be on the ground talking to you on the radio, and then you take the blame, and I'll take the credit. And I said, let me think about this. So I take the blame for flying under the Eiffel Tower, and then you take the credit. He said, yeah, you got it. What?
Sounds like a raw deal to me.
No, well, it gets even better. Okay. So we did exactly what he said. I think we had 13 photographers on the ground. You could do that 40 years ago. You could not do it today. It's dead easy to do. It was safe. There was nothing to it. So I was over in Paris for another air race 6 months later, and I went over to this guy's apartment, and he had one room dedicated to the flight. And every picture that all of these photographers took, he had all over the walls. I thought, this is really cool. Man, this is so cool. And I looked and looked and looked, and he had a loop, okay, of the airplane. I had a cameraman inside the airplane, and he had a loop showing the airplane flying under the tower again and again and again. And I thought, God, this is so cool. But then I realized there was one thing missing from the pictures.
Picture of you?
And that was me. Okay. And I realized what he had done exactly what he said he was going to do. He was going to let me make a flight. He was going to let me take the blame for it. And then he was going to tell everybody else that he did it. So,
well, at least he was the man of his word.
Yeah, exactly. I always appreciate that most of the time. But people would walk into his house and they would see this, and he would talk about, oh, yeah, it was perfect. Saturday morning, nice, beautiful day, 11:15 in the morning, tourists all over the place. He knew all that because it was sitting on the damn ground. Okay. But
well,
it was just,
I like stories like that, Bob. I've been following you and your work on 321 Gold for goodness a long time, but I've always liked to know a little bit about the people whom I follow. I fortunate enough to get to know Richard Russell a little bit, and that was my favorite part. He was a mentor of mine, and favorite part of learning from Richard was to learn the kind of man he was. I thank you very much for sharing a little bit of your story. And again, thank you for your service. I do appreciate that very, very much. And you being here today. I could sit and talk with you about these kinds of stories all day. Far more interesting to me than the craziness that we see around us in geopolitical events, monetary policy, fiscal policy, etc. But nonetheless, that is probably why we need to, or something we do need to talk about. So we'll transition a little bit. But again, thank you for sharing a little bit about your past. And speaking of unusual, there are some very unusual things happening with gold. I'd like to get your take on it. You know, it's unusual to see gold rising alongside real interest rates rising. It's something we very rarely see. In fact, they're supposed to move inverse of each other. In fact, Gibson's paradox speaks of that. If you have low interest rates, and no opportunity cost for gold, it should do well in a zero-bound interest rate environment that we saw for so long. But if you have rising rates, in essence, people could buy treasuries with safety. What do you think this says about what's going on with the U.S. economy to see gold and real interest rates moving at the same time?
Well, here's what's interesting. It's not really the U.S. economy, okay? It's actually the world's economy. If you passed Economics 101, and if you look at the debt situation in the world, the world is awash in debt that we all understand is never going to get paid. And the U.S. has the world's reserve currency. It's had it for 81 years. And typically over time, the French, the Italians, the British, you get to be the world's reserve currency for 80 to 82 years. So we are right there in the envelope that suggests a change could be right around the corner. Now, some of the stuff that's going on, and I sent you an article, we got the Trump tariff tantrum. And of course, Trump comes in and says, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And he doesn't understand that when you attack someone else, it's perfectly natural for them to attack you. And I sent you a piece that talks about Japan, which is the largest holder of U.S. debt. It's selling treasuries like crazy, which of course drives interest rates up. And I think we have $7 trillion in short-term treasuries this year that has to be refinanced. And I believe, and I'm going to step way out of the limb, and I'm going to chop the limb behind me. I believe we're in a slow motion crash of the U.S. dollar, which of course is going to affect everything in the world. Europe is a total basket case. Okay, we won't even talk about the leadership in Europe is so weak, it's staggering. There was a video clip of Starmer and the Chancellor of Germany and Macron last week in a train going to Kiev to see Zelensky. And when the photographers entered the rooms, they grabbed a baggie and a Coke spoon and hid them. And I thought, this is insane. Okay, we know Zelensky's a cokehead. When you see people doing things as stupid as Zelensky's done for 3 years, and Macron saying we're going to put French troops in, and the British saying we're going to put French troops in. Now, let me give you an analogy. Do you have any idea of how large the United States Marine Corps is today?
I do not.
Okay, it's about 160,000. So take a wild stab. How big do you think the British Army is in total today?
I have no idea, but I bet you're going to tell me it's less than 160,000.
How about 75,000?
Not very imposing.
Well, actually, it is kind of imposing. 72,000 of the 75,000 are reserved for ceremonial events. So the British Army only has 3,000 combat people, and they're going to send them to Ukraine to fight Russia when Russia supplied low-cost resources to Europe for years. Russia was responsible for the financial success of Europe. If you go back to when the U.S. blew up Nord Stream, the Chancellor of Germany was in Washington the day it happened, and he was in Washington to give permission to the United States to blow up Nord Stream. And nobody talks about this except me. There were actually 4 pipelines. 3 of them got blown up. Now, that's how we know the United States military blew it up. Because our woke military today is so incompetent that they can't blow up a pipeline and succeed. So you've got this situation where the German economy has been destroyed over the last 2.5 years because of the lack of cheap energy, yet they could actually have natural gas flowing to Germany tomorrow just by turning on the tap, and they refused to do that. So the United States started the war. It went back 30 years ago. They want to destroy Russia. Napoleon tried the same thing. Hitler tried the same thing. And the result is going to be exactly the same. So you were talking about geopolitical events. We're so close to World War III. And there's a very convincing argument that governments start wars when they're bankrupt. Okay, when there's no way out, when they have to finally fess up, say, okay, we bankrupted our country, they start wars. And it certainly appears that that's the case.
Yeah, what did Einstein say about definition of insanity, right? You would think that history would have taught our leaders a more poignant lesson, but evidently they haven't. And as silly as that sounds, I did an interview recently where, in essence, this is now the third interview that I've done in sequence where the theme has been of NATO foolishly prodding Putin into starting World War III, attacking a NATO country in Article 5, and it's Martin Armstrong is all but certain as certain can be that that we're this close to World War III, and it was very scary listening to it. You're not alone in your sentiment. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Certainly, that wouldn't be good for any of us. But
can I give you an
please.
example? Okay.
Sure.
Estonia tried to stop a Russian tanker 2 or 3 days ago that was sailing to Russia through international waters. Now, the interesting thing about the armed forces of Estonia is they have Girl Scout troops in Estonia that are bigger than the Estonian Army, Navy, and Air Force.
And they are a member of NATO, correct?
And they are a member of NATO. And what they were trying to do was instigate the Russians to respond. Well, from a legal point of view, what the Russians did was perfectly reasonable. Estonia was saying, look, this ship is sailing without insurance, and we have the right to seize it in international waters and inspect it and see if it's insured. Well, the reason it is not insured is because the U.S. EU sanctions on Russia preclude the Russians getting insurance through London. Hang on a sec. Hey, Rock, come here.
Is your dog's name Rob?
Rock.
Oh, Rock. Okay.
Yeah, that's because of his head. His head is as hard as a rock.
So they knew, in essence, I was thinking to myself, well, how the hell do they know they don't have insurance? They know they don't have insurance because the sanctions are blocking the ability to get insurance.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those catch-22 kind of things. And what they were trying to do, there's no ship. Estonia has 6 PT-size boats in their navy. And the Russians could sink those boats in about 5 minutes, okay? Why Europe is trying to do this, I will say, and I've been dead set against that war right from the very beginning. I'm dead set against every war. Nothing is ever accomplished in war. And the only thing that happens, there are no winners. There are only losers, and one side loses a lot more than the other side. Now, the amazing thing is that Europe has committed financial suicide via the sanctions, and it's actually strengthened Russia. Now, you were talking about the Einstein quote, and that is, insanity is doing the same thing again and again and again and expecting the different results. I believe that the number, I think there have been somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million Ukrainian soldiers killed in the last 3 years. So when Macron is talking about 3,000 or 5,000 troops, or Starmer's talking about 3,000 or 5,000 troops, or Estonia is talking about the Girl Scout troop they're going to arm, that's a joke. I mean, the Russians kill that much in a weekend. And the interesting thing is that from the mainstream media, it's totally biased. Everything you're being told is a lie. Ukraine and NATO have been losing this war right from the get-go. Ukraine actually initialed a peace agreement in March of 2022, and the British Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, said, no, you don't want to stop fighting. You could steal as long as we keep shipping weapons to you. So keep fighting. But that's killed 1.5 million Ukrainian soldiers. And during World War II, the United States, in 4 years of combat, only lost 400,000 troops. That's how devastating that war has been to Ukraine. And the fact of the matter is, the fellow who was the head of the CIA under Joe Biden, Burns, was the ambassador to Russia. And he said 30 years ago, if you try to bring Ukraine into NATO, that is a red line that the Russians will not allow you to cross, and they will go to war. The amazing thing is, it's a totally one-sided war. Everybody in the West is lying about what's actually happening. There is no way Ukraine could possibly win that war. And the idea of encouraging Russia to use nuclear weapons, that's insanity.
Yeah, and that's more along the lines of what Martin Armstrong was saying, that almost verbatim. And it's scary when you think that this is really what they're trying to do. As a footnote, I saw that video, Macron, and it's interesting when they realize what they had left on the table in front of them. There have been people that have zoomed in on that, and it is 100% a bag of cocaine and a Coke spoon. We are being led by some truly moronic people, or at least the world is being led by some truly moronic people, and that certainly is no exception. Yeah, I mean, to me, geopolitical events and the macro really is the important part. Let's zoom out a little bit, because while I do believe that the macro really is the important part, the forest, not the rustling leaves of the trees, we do need to look at a few of the trees, see if they're giving us some hints. And one of the things that, bringing things back home for a moment, we'll get back out to talking some other macro stuff in a minute, but we've seen since November the United States become a massive importer of gold, month over month over month over month over month. And in fact, I think I have it right here. Let me just see. Yeah, here we go. These are the COMEX delivery notices in terms of comparing 2024 with 2025 in terms of percent change. I mean, this is how different it is, right? What we are seeing is massive in terms of the difference in anything we've ever seen. The United States has become a net importer of gold since November, and the amount of gold coming in particular, over 16,000 contracts since, or in the May contract, pardon me, 16,000 contracts delivered in May. It's the largest ever. That's 1.6 million ounces of gold that was delivered into the COMEX in May. So these numbers are massive. What does that say to you? With all of this gold coming into the United States, Bob, what does that say to you? Because this is so far outside of anything I've ever seen in the 35 years I've been doing this. I am, would love to get your take on what you believe is going on with all the gold coming into the United States.
Well, interestingly enough, and that's a really good analogy on your part, the price of gold increasing $300 in 4 days, that's a thermometer. That's saying something's going on. The size of this increase in gold coming into the United States, that's something saying something's going on. The Japanese saying, we're not going to accept tariffs on Japanese cars. That is trying to say something. what we have got, and I'm not going to blame Trump for 100% of it because most of the problem goes back to prior administrations, to Obama, to Biden, to Bush, to Clinton. We've been on the spending spree. We are bankrupt. And what people are doing is they're rushing to a safe haven. Now, what's really interesting to me, it's not the amount of gold coming in or the price of gold increasing. It's a dichotomy between the price of gold and the price of silver. Okay. There is this rush into gold that's not associated with the rush into silver. However, I'm seeing intelligence reports saying the Chinese have started literally in the last week telling their people to buy silver. Now, if you've been around that long, you remember gold hitting $50 in 1980 and almost $50 in 2000. Not gold, silver, almost $50 in April of 2011. We have a financial crisis going on. It's invisible to most people. It's true of the bond markets. It's true of the European market. It's true of the euro. It's true of the dollar. It's true of the Japanese yen. It's true of the Chinese yuan. We are entering an area of total chaos. Now, I'm in the midst of writing an article about a mining company literally right now. And I'm saying we're going to see things we have never seen before. Nobody's going to predict it accurately because we are off the edge of the known area. We're going to see things. I've seen reports that say the Trump administration wants to revalue gold at tens of thousands of dollars an ounce, and it could happen. I'm not sure.
Gold is held? Do you know the name of the account that gold is held in on the balance sheet of the U.S. government, by the way?
No.
It's called the gold revaluation account. Can't make that up. Same thing in all of Western Europe. That is the name of it on the balance sheet, actually. So to your point, not so crazy after all. I've seen many of those same reports. I'm sorry. Continue, please.
No, but something bad is happening, and it's happening literally across the board. Now, one thing that I'll point out is there is an underlying conflict between the debt-based system of the West and the resource-based system of the East and South. And I think we're seeing a transition in power and influence from the West to the East. And of course, the West doesn't want to give up power. I laugh at Europe because the leaders in Europe, almost to a man, are delusional. Okay, the French think they're significant in world affairs. The British think they're significant in world affairs. Estonia now believes they're going to play a major part in world affairs. It's all bullshit. So let's take it one step further. If you see total financial chaos occurring in the United States, what should an investor do?
Right. Well, and I think that's ultimately where we're going with the whole premise of this show is the little by little is explaining logarithmic decay, which you could argue is what's happening in the West, where by little, then bang, all at once, we see, to your point, a transitioning of power from the West to the global South and East. And this has been something I've been focusing on, Bob, for the last 5 years in all of my discussions about the BRICS and the de-dollarization. To your point about China and they imploring their citizens to consider silver, I was looking at your website this morning, and I noticed on May 8th, you had a article on there about Dolly Varden. Sean Kuhn is a buddy of mine, the CEO. And in an interview I did with him, he said, Andy, the Chinese are the second largest producer of silver in the world. And they're flying all around Latin America, in particular Peru, going directly to the miners, disintermediating the market by buying sludge, concentrate, and doré bars, which are the crudely refined bars that are fashioned before they're sent for purification to the refineries made by the miners. But they're buying this stuff at almost double what the West will pay and shipping it home to China for purification and refining. The question that I would pose to people to ponder that really substantiates what you're saying is, why would the second largest producer of silver in the world, David Morgan says they told him when he was in a tour in China that they're number one, but the world believes they're number two. Why would they be doing something as extraordinary as going directly to the miners, disintermediating the marketplace to keep it private, and buying concentrate and doré double priced from what the West will pay, and then refining it themselves, which would support what you're saying? And the bottom line is that the Chinese and the BRICS nations certainly have been accumulating tremendous amount of metal for quite some time. I think it's interesting. And let's just diverge just a tiny bit, because they're all connected. All of these things play into the little by little. While all this stuff is happening, the chess pieces are being moved around the board in places like China. We see the Fed making moves maybe behind the curtain. And what I mean by that is that over the last few days, last week, the Fed quietly, and I say quietly because you don't see it anywhere, quietly purchased $43.6 billion in U.S. Treasuries over just a few days, while denying its quantitative easing. They bought 30-year Treasuries, they bought 10-year Treasuries, and they bought 3-year Treasuries. And let me see if I actually have the exact numbers. Here it is. So they bought $43.6 billion, of which they bought $20 billion in 3-year bonds on May 5th, $8.8 billion in 30-year bonds on May 8th, and $34.8 billion in 10-year bonds over 2 days in between on the 6th and 7th. What does that say to you about what's going on right now with the Fed and the fact that there's a waning demand for our U.S. Treasuries, so much so that in order to keep the interest rates somewhat stable from skyrocketing higher, the Fed has to come in and quietly buy $43.6 billion in Treasuries just to keep the game going? What does that tell you where we are? Are they losing control, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, you were talking about the Fed and the Fed buying large quantities of Treasury notes. Here's the analogy I would like to use. When you were a kid, did you ever have silver dollars?
Sure.
Okay. If you had a silver dollar in your left pocket and you took it out and put it in your right pocket, how much better off would you be?
Not very much better, I would think.
Okay, so when the Fed buys treasuries, okay, they're U.S. government obligations. So you got a U.S. government agency buying a U.S. government obligation because somebody else doesn't want it. It doesn't change anything about debt whatsoever. It just changes who controls the debt. Now, actually, I think there was something of far more importance last week from Bessonette, Secretary of the Treasury, when he said that the United States is considering extending maturities and lowering interest rates. That's called a default, and that's a big deal.
Well, and I don't know if there's any correlation, right? But the fact that he said that would fall in line with Judy Shelton's book, As Good as Gold, where Judy is advocating, of course, she was Trump's nominee in 2016 to run the Fed. Many think she'll take over for Powell when his tenure expires. But her idea was to issue zero coupon 50-year treasuries, so to lower the coupon, extend the yield, but to have it redeemable in gold at the end, which, if looked at from that perspective, might actually explain some of the massive influx of gold into the COMEX over the past 6 months that would enable, in essence, the U.S. Government to actually peg and back a 50-year treasury by gold, especially if you then believe that they will stay true to the name of the gold revaluation account, as Roosevelt did over my shoulder, as Nixon did in 72 and 73, when he revalued gold from 35 to 38, from 38 to 42.22, where it's remained on our books ever since. You put it all together, you bring the gold home first, you revalue it, and peg it to a new treasury. Besant is kind of throwing out some crumbs here. He did earlier in the year say that they were going to monetize the asset side of the balance sheet, came back and said, well, I'm not talking about gold. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Maybe they hadn't brought enough in at the time. There are a lot of things that are coming together, but to your point, who the hell would want to take a lowered coupon rate on a 50-year treasury, to your point, from an insolvent government who, when you factor in, entitlements that are off balance sheet, you're $200 trillion in debt. So yeah, you're right. It's a sign of desperation, unless it is a sign of a reintroduction of gold into the monetary system to peg and inspire confidence to our treasury market, which since 2014 net has not seen any new investment from central banks. So yeah, I think it's very interesting. What do you think about what Judy Shelton had to say? Is that something that you'd give credibility to?
I have a lot of time for her, but we have very few people in the media or in government who actually tell the truth.
Right.
Okay, Elon Musk came out and said Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. Was he accurate?
Yes. It's 77 trillion in debt, according to Simon Black. He talked about that a year or two ago, and he said it was 77 trillion in the whole. Social Security is.
Okay, we've seen this movie before. What happens in every single Ponzi scheme?
Yeah, it implodes.
Exactly. Now, Elon Musk also came out, set up a Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, and he was going to reduce spending by the United States government by $2 trillion. That has lowered to about 150 billion. $150 billion in U.S. spending is chump change. If you are ever going to solve any problem, you have to accurately define the problem. And the problem is we have too much government. The government is spending too much money. It's bankrupt now, and it is only going to get worse. And the solution has to be to lower spending. Now, Donald Trump came in and he was going to be the peace president, but he's increased spending for the Defense Department by 13%. For what? Okay, who are we at war with that we need to spend 13% more? So we've got a problem that no one is addressing except the market. And the market actually works. And the market's saying, we don't want your crap. We don't want your useless paper. We think you're doing stupid things. We don't trust you. So we're going to destroy your currency. And the Defense Department, the deep state, everybody's part of it. If you look at every fiat currency in history, they end up in the same swamp, the same garbage pit. And that's exactly what's happening to the United States. It's strange enough, and I've got a lot of respect for Martin Armstrong. I don't claim that he's correct in everything, because I know he's wrong sometimes. However, he's one of the few people willing to call a spade. The United States is bankrupt. We need to pay the price, and part of paying the price is to admit you're bankrupt in the first place. So everything that we're doing is just smoothing things over. And I find it very funny that the Fed is buying treasuries and pretending they're doing something. They're not. They're yanking the rug right out from underneath the dollar. And very soon, if you go back to Hemingway, a collapse takes place slowly, and then suddenly.
Well, that's the name of this show. Little by little, then all at once. It's the same thing. And that's why I say that, Bob, because that's why I'm such a big fan of that phrase, because you look around us, look at all the things that happened over the last 4 years, how they were little by little, then bang, all of a sudden, midway through 2020, when the pandemic hits, it was all at once. Wokeness and lawlessness in the cities and election interference and judicial system, 2 tiers of it. And whether or not people believe there was election interference or a 2-tier justice system, the perception amongst much of the world is that there was, or the move away from, meritocracy into light. All of those things drove me crazy, but they happened little by little at the very beginning. Then bang, all of a sudden it's everywhere. And I think that's emblematic of what you're talking about here. And you're right. It is crazy what is happening and how fast it's happening. I guess we'll find out where this all ends up, because things are beginning to, I think, accelerate a little bit, which leads me to a point of sentiment indicators. And you've always been someone who is a big follower of market sentiment. I've noticed that. And where do you think we are right now in the emotional cycle of this market, especially, I notice, with retail investors now making up a record 36% of stock activity, and the institutional traders are fading. But when we talk about the 36%, that's triple the 10-year average of 12% of retail participation. It's now basically an all-time high. What does that say to you?
The very best book ever written about finance is Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And it was written around 1850. And there's about 30 examples. Each example is a chapter of the stupidity of people and governments and leaders. And I've written 2 financial books, and one of the financial books was a knockoff of sorts of Extraordinary Popular Delusions, bringing it up to date. People are dumber than bricks, and they always do exactly the wrong time. Now, tell me who the best investor alive today is.
Well, I would assume you're hedging towards he's just the Sultan of Omaha. My gosh, it just skipped my name.
Warren Buffett.
Warren Buffett. Thank you. Skipped my mind.
Okay.
Warren Buffett.
If you had wanted to make money starting about 40 years ago, all you had to do was do exactly what Warren Buffett has done. Now, when I was a 20-year-old fighter pilot, I was just full of myself. Okay, I go into a squadron, and I'm going to be a hotshot pilot. And I went up to the guy who was the best pilot in the squadron. I said, I want to be the best pilot in the squadron. How do I do that? And he said, you can't. And I said, why can't I? And he said, because I'm the best. Oh, okay. He said, if you will do everything exactly the way I do it, you can be the second best fighter pilot in the squadron. And I said, oh, okay. So you don't have to know anything about investing if you followed Warren Buffett. What is Warren Buffett sitting on right now?
Almost $500 billion in cash.
Exactly. Okay. The smartest investors in the world today are sitting on cash. And frankly, cash is trash. And you and I know it. And you've got all these examples behind you. And I showed you 15 examples that I've got on my walls. Cash is trash. But sometimes it's the cleanest trash you can possibly have. And Warren Buffett has known for years that we're about to fall off a cliff. It's absolutely typical of retail investors. There's 100 reasons to buy at every top, and there's 100 reasons to sell at every bottom. And you don't have to know anything about interest rates or the Fed or the Treasury or Democrats or anything else to make money profitably. All you have to do is follow the crowd and do exactly the opposite. And strange enough, I'm not really a gold bug, okay? But I look at gold as an insurance policy against financial chaos. And I've been buying gold since 1968 when I was paying $35 an ounce. And almost exactly a month ago, it was 100 times higher. But did gold change its value?
No, the dollar lost its value.
Thank you. And nobody ever talks about that. Now, the sentiment of the West is now totally different than the sentiment of the East. And the sentiment of Japan is saying, we don't want your trash treasury notes. We don't want your tariffs on Japanese cars. The Chinese are saying, we want gold and silver. And they're loading up and they're stocking up with real assets. And people in the West are stocking up with fake assets right at the very top. So the future is exceptionally easy to predict. And for anyone not prepared, it's going to be catastrophic. And you hinted a couple of times in here that we're in the acceleration phase. I think the world's financial system, and especially the U.S. dollar and the U.S. Financial system, it's about to go curvilinear. I think it's so close that it's going to surprise everybody, including me.
Well, you talk about people being as dumb as a box of bricks. Speaking of bricks, we're seeing macro shifts. We're seeing the BRICS, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus the others that they had admitted last year, which would be Ethiopia, Iran, UAE, Egypt, of course, Saudi Arabia, who's hedging their bet right now, kind of straddling the lines. We've seen 40 plus countries apply, some formally, some informally. We've seen Indonesia become a full member of the BRICS now. It's an expansion, nonetheless. It is growing. We've seen many things over the last few weeks that really make me feel this way. In particular, the cross-border payment system, that the renminbi payment system that has just been released with the 10 or 11 Asian countries in Southeast Asia, 5 of the Middle Eastern countries, which is big enough as it is. But then the Russian foreign minister, Lavrov, saying they're opening this payment system up to non-BRICS countries. And when I think of the Belt Road Initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union and the Shanghai Cooperation Corporation, all of these countries are very much aligned with the BRICS, which represent close to 90% of the human population. And this cross-border payment system, which is not compatible with SWIFT or the dollar, will be open to all of them. It is a game changer. So with all of that being said, this little by little by little by little, then bang, we are seeing these macro shifts expanding and countries de-dollarizing and geopolitical tensions rising, all of these things that you've talked about. Do you think we're on the verge of a global reset? I guess is the question I would ask you in that context.
100%.
And does gold fit into that reset? Is it slowly being reintegrated into the monetary system? Maybe not as backing a common currency, but as the BRICS have been hedging towards using it to settle imbalances. In other words, trade over the bridge platform in their local central bank digital currencies, free from SWIFT interference, and settling imbalances in gold. Does that sound something like maybe you could see happening?
Nope.
No. How do you see it playing out?
Okay. If you go back from about 1825 to 1900, that was a period of the greatest financial change in world history. And it literally was across the board. It was in Asia, it was in Africa, it was in Central America, South America, North America. There was a book written called The Birth of Plenty that talked about it. And the interesting thing is, what was the currency in use in Chile?
I could not tell you. The peso, I would think.
The gold peso. What was the currency in the UK?
The gold Britannia?
No, gold sovereign.
Gold sovereign.
And in Italy, and in
The
Switzerland,
golden lira, the
and
golden
in
franc.
Germany, and in Canada,
Golden
and in
month.
New Zealand, and in Australia. Now, I'm going to really climb out on a limb here because I'm going to suggest something to you nobody's ever suggested before. The solution to the financial problem is so simple that sooner or later we're going to go to it just because there's no other possible alternative. Now, Quentin Henney happens to be my best friend. He's probably one of the top 2 or 3 geologists in the world. He and I sat down almost 20 years ago, and we designed a new currency. And the new currency is a currency that every country in the world could use. And it was based on gold and silver, but instead of pesos or dollars or pounds or lira, it was gold in grams and silver in grams. Now, if you go back to this glory age of financial change from 1825 to 1900, the British sovereign was interchangeable with the French franc, was interchangeable with the German mark, the Italian lira, the Mexican peso. So they were all based on gold, okay? And it was easy to figure out the difference. But rather than have pesos, liras, marks, pounds, you have grams. I believe it will happen, and people are inching into it now. But if you've ever known somebody that was a drunk, okay, for them to stop drinking, there has to be a crisis, and they have to hit bottom. And we are so close to hitting the bottom financially, literally around the world. I think the BRICS is succeeding, but if you look at the financial situation in China, or you look at the financial situation in Japan, there are a lot of countries in deep, serious trouble financially, and it all goes back to the same thing. And that's having a currency that has no value. Okay, if you don't know what value is and all you know is price, you can't run an economy. Okay, and if I would be very interested when gold hit $3,500. Weren't you a little shocked? Because I looked at it as, holy cow, I never dreamed of $3,500 gold. But what should be obvious is that wasn't the top. The top is in front of us. We don't know where it is. We don't know if it's 5,000, 10,000, or 50,000. But what's happening gold is not increasing in value. The dollar is decreasing in value, and the solution is simple. Get rid of the gold, or get rid of the dollar, get rid of the pound, get rid of the lira, the marks, all of the currencies, go to gold.
You know, it's interesting. You can look at when gold hit $35 and you can say that the dollar at that moment lost 100% of its value since 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window at $35. It's backed off a bit. So since 1971 in relation to gold, to your point, gold has lost 98% of its value where it is today, almost 99% actually. To where we are today, a sad statement, and that really supports everything that you're saying. And I could draw analogies going all the way back to when Roosevelt confiscated gold, or even back to Roman times when we talk about what gold has done to retain its value. But all currencies face this similar pattern, as Dr. Franz Pick once said. All fiat currencies are inherently meant to die and inherently retrace back to their natural value of zero. And I appreciate your perspective on that. It certainly does make sense. It would make it much more simplistic. Certainly, it's interesting when you see the amount of gold all the central banks have been accumulating. Maybe we're not too far off from something like that. Only time will tell. Bob, with everything we've discussed, if you could give one warning or insight to investors after all of your experience in this industry and in watching macroeconomics and geopolitical events, and just the wisdom that comes with being a student of the markets for 50 years or longer, what would it be at this point? And where can people follow your work? I know 321 Gold to learn more from you.
Well, actually, they can go to Amazon. I've written about 10 books, 3 of which made it to the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. And it's a free website, and there's lots of information there. Rather than give advice, what I would prefer to do is give an analog. If you went out and took your wife out for dinner and you came home and your house was burning down, and a guy came up and said, "Would you like to increase the insurance on your house?" What would you do?
Well, if you said effective last week, I might take it. But at that point right there, I don't think I would take it.
Well, strange enough, if you can buy extra insurance on your house when it's burning down, it's a pretty good investment.
Yeah, it would be amazing, right?
People have exactly the same opportunity today. Now, here's what's true. When one person does this and another person does exactly the opposite, they cannot both be correct. Okay? So when BRICS and China and the East are buying the crap out of gold, they're either right or they're wrong. Okay? It cannot be both ways. And like investing with Warren Buffett, okay, all you got to do is follow Warren Buffett. Now, the smartest people in the world are accumulating gold, silver, platinum, and palladium now because they see what's happening with the dollar. They see what's happening to the euro. They're seeing what's happening to the world's bond market. We hadn't even touched the world's bond market. The world's bond market is an utter disaster. All of these things are failing, and you can buy an extra insurance policy while the house is burning down. And there's a Spanish term for it called el goodo dilo.
El Goodo Dilo. All right, I like that.
Yep.
I like that. And two, let me see if I can just, I don't know if I can pull that off or not. I wanted to show you something to your point, but I don't think I can do it. Yes, you look at much of the Western world 10-year and 30-year Treasury and their bond markets, and the rates are all going higher. All of the bonds are in trouble. You're right. And I like your analogy. No matter how it plays out, the biggest money in the world, and now the United States as well, is accumulating gold. And we'll find out what's really behind and who, hopefully we'll find out who's behind all the importing of gold and what it really means. But Bob, you're a fascinating guy, even with all of the technical difficulties we had today. And Rock wanted to chime in. I really enjoyed this. I'd love to do it again with you, pick up where we left off. I've been doing this for 35 years. I've been following you for a very long time, and I'm embarrassed to say today was the first day we've actually met in person, and albeit over the internet, but I really enjoyed it. And now I understand why I've been following you for so long. I thank you for your candor. I thank you for coming on today, and I hope we'll be able to do it again real soon.
We can, and to the extent that, and you can comment on it if you want to, what you've got on your wall is identical to what I've got on my wall. I want to know what money is, but to know what money is, you've got to know what money is not. And I've got 15 examples of what used to be money sitting on my wall, and you got the same thing right behind you. We are doing something glorious. We're trying to help people, and I think that's a good thing.
Well, you know what? It is a good thing. And I think when we talk about what is money, go back to what J.P. Morgan said. Gold is money, everything else is credit. And I do too. You know, I often, once in a while, you get people say, well, he owns a gold company, he's talking his book. I think it's silly to believe that running a successful business and having good intentions have to be mutually exclusive of one another. I don't think they have to. And I echo your sentiment, and thank you for articulating it that way. I couldn't have said better myself. And we will do this again, and I will look forward to picking up where we left off. And you know, I was just in France and not too far from you. So next time I'm there, had I known you were there, I will drop in on you and Rock, and we can share a glass of French wine and talk about things. I would love that. And if you're ever down in Southern Florida, I hope you'll do the same. But I do appreciate it very much. You're a fascinating man, Bob, and thank you for your time today. Thanks for dropping in.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Likewise, sir.
Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.